Well, good day to you on this somewhat chilly morn, and I hope that explains my appearance. What we were talking about was a means of orientation which I consider to be fundamental in a rational approach to wisdom. Wisdom is what I define as what we seek in science. It is also what we seek in religion, so that's a common goal. So that unifies science and religion under the rubric of, well, essentially, what I would say is simply rationality. Can you have religion and rationality? Theoretically, you could. Would there be such a thing proposable? The first difficulty one might encounter in unifying religion with science is that they're incompatible in some way. I'm not sure that that's ever been proved, but I do recognize that as a question. But rather than start on a false note, really just looking at things negatively, what do we have on the positive side of rational logic? I think we all know the answer to that, and since this is intended to be a summary discussion, we'll move along and just accept that. Rational logic produces technology. Technology, which is a vast subject that necessarily involves the word magic, which is not, I would say, a term ordinarily used in strict science, which I do propose as the correct method of approach in all science, is strict. So is that strict? We wish to stay on a positive track here because we think we found a pattern and a paradigm that is orienting towards general research in any direction. That would be a unification of religion and science, would be a very, very good thing to get if it could be had. What do they have in common? Wisdom. So now the recursive step is define wisdom. I'm going to propose that this is now the time to introduce the word truth, because wisdom is based on truth. And now it comes down to the recursive question: what is truth? The only question on record asked of Yeshua that he did not answer. What is truth? I believe it was Pilate, a Roman person, who asked that question. A story well worth recount. What is truth? In order to address such a fundamental question, one might want a comparator. What is untruth? This introduces a branch of science, which is, I would say right off the bat, is pseudoscience, but I think it's unavoidable. You're now talking about forensics, and that will have a subjective factor. You're looking for liars. Because if you're talking about truth, you're talking about liars. There will be somebody who will use truth to defeat its own purpose. That would be called a general enemy or perhaps an adversary. So that's a systematic approach to the question of truth, which I insist is worth laying out on the table at the very least. When you say the word truth, you have a reason for asking that question. Because doesn't everybody know what truth is already? Don't we all agree on what is the truth? Forensics. The ability to check a record. Because what if you have a record from the past that might be worth some interest? Oh, I would just suggest the Tanakh, for instance, the 5 books of Moses, for instance, the book of Genesis in particular, just for instance, records that go into the distant past. of what our ancestors viewed of their environment. Wouldn't that be worth knowing? We've sought it with all of our hearts. All the way into geology now is, where do we come from? Doesn't that seem a rather important question to you? I would suggest that now is the time to bring up that question. If one is asking, what is truth? What is truth? Wow. In science, we seek to reduce that to binary so that we can make measurements. And the reason for that is for communication, because you're talking about now agreement on facts. Facts, if they're physical facts, are important, and we call that science. It's that getting facts is important to humanity. That's science. The way I define it, I make my job out of defining things correctly, because that's the only way to do science. So I am a logician, but primarily I'm a geometer. And over here, you will see a geometrical object of extreme worth. In the education of a human being, I'll just say, on this planet at this time, to be able to get an education in geometry is primary. Geometry comes first. But there's something alongside geometry that I now find at this moment inescapable. So I'm going to introduce this into a slightly adjusted schema here. Because in our approach to answering the question, what is truth? So that we can gain orientation in our effort to answer where and what, which also goes to when. But we're trying to get a unary answer to a unary question, and my suggested way to start is, where are you? Well, you're under that moon. That's the first thing that men noticed about where they are, is that thing is above us. That is the closest thing to us that is above us. That is an object in the sky that every age group agrees exactly upon what that is. No dissension whatsoever. And that is the tip of an iceberg. What do you say about that thing? In your mind, be honest, just what do you think about that thing? What is it? You're no longer thinking about yourself explicitly. I am on Earth. That's a frame of reference. But if you stare at that object long enough in the correct frame of mind, you will see something that will change your perspective forever. It will be a permanent change to you. This has so many levels that at the moment, unless we wish to enter into a philosophical vein, that is a gold mother lode, we will do well to desist from that at this moment. But the number of levels of new instantaneous perception of inestimable value comes directly from this object, which is physically real, but it's also a geometric circle. That is a line. I am Euclid. I never thought of a line. Instead, I am Euclid now. And I decide not to begin with a line to measure the plane. What do? I would say, from my modern perspective, Euclid, myself now, really projecting myself in a Gedankenexperiment. I am Euclid. I do not want a line because I've figured out that it is exactly the definition of the calculus derivative integral relationship between two spatial dimensionalities. That you can either conceive the plane with circles, which is how the universe does it, or you can conceive it with two linear derivatives of that object, called x and y. And if you reduce it to just x, you get numbers that measure distance. That's Euclidean geometry. And the inception of Euclidean mathematics, which has now advanced to such an exalted state that we're forced to the calculus and to complex numbers. And that's the tip of an iceberg also, which I will not go into because I already have in several series, on the nature of the integral number system for the plane, beginning with a two-component number for the circle, which are two reciprocal numbers that multiply to light speed. This is the wavelength-frequency relationship in Max Planck's very famous equation. Quite simple, deceptively simple, but it does officially have Planck's constant in it. Which one? There are two. All of this comes, what I just said, as an example of the levels of insight that this object yields to the human mind. I am Euclid, and I begin with a circle. And I define the line as on a constant. But I'm looking down instead of through a scaffolding. I now have an orientation that you don't get with a line, and you definitely don't get with two orthogonal lines forcing you to a square root function. If you want to use Pythagoras, you'll need square root. That's usually the end of a child's introduction to mathematics, is at the point of being asked to do a square root. On the east coast of this great nation, in my youth in the 1960s, the mid-1960s, I was trained how to do a square root. And I still remember how to do it. It's not easy, and it involves a certain methodology, a certain computerizable process of reduction to get a square root, which is the square root of the hypotenuse in space-time. So this is a space-time computation. You must be able to take a square root because Einstein simply used the four-component number square root. X squared plus y squared plus z squared are the three spatial dimensions minus time squared, t squared. So that's the Einstein signature. All of this comes from observing the moon. All of this begins to be understandable. Einstein did not see this, you understand, although he did. It's superpositional. He could see it, but he could barely communicate it. But supercomputers are able to validate Einstein's discoveries in geometry. It is in geometry. He did discover an orthogonality, but what I discovered, just to add something to the mix, is the second form of orthogonality. It's the integral form of the orthogonal relationship on planarized space, which then becomes cubic. So Einstein began with cubes. We begin with spheres. So the direct relationship between the computable numbers, which are linear, they're single component numbers, actually, that's not quite true. On computers, they use a two-component number system called binary. And that's not a linear system, it's binary. However, it is obviously linearizable. That's the value of the binary numbers. They're consistently linearizable numbers. And these are the strict binary numbers. All of this has to do with that circle there, because now we're going to reparameterize the plane, which means we reset the way we see, and you will no longer use the scaffolding. But it's important to know that it's still there. It is on the diameter of that moon. That moon has an explicit ortho axis called its axis of rotation, which is quite important to understand if you ever want to answer the problem of mommy, why does the moon always show the same face to us? Which every child progressively realizes is a real question. Why isn't it rotating? Technically it is, but it's actually not, because of an insight that you have to have into why it would possibly do that. So you have to go out into the cloud, as we say, and use induction to figure out why it might continuously be showing its face to the Earth without relative axial motion. In other words, it's not rotating from our frame of reference. It's not rotating. That's because it is tidally locked on a gravitational component, because the moon is not the same density on both sides as we see it now. It's slightly more dense on this side, either because of its shape, which it turns out it is because of its shape at least, but also because of the relative density of the material inside it from one hemisphere to another, which in this case is locked. Obviously, the gravitational force of the Earth is stronger than that of the sun because of the sun's relative great distance from the Earth or moon. So the moon feels the gravity of Earth much more strongly than from anything else in the solar system, although it does feel the gravity of every other object in the solar system, and that has been proved. Although there's always a footnote, but it has been proved in some sense. So this is what you get in a level change, going up several rungs into abstract space, where you're now using your mind in a brand new way, which is geometric, which is how your mind is constructed to work, is geometrically. But you need motion, and we know that from how we see, that you can't tell depth unless there's motion, ultimately. Because we do see a flat screen image. That has been proved by the physiologists. You can actually prove it to yourself with the famous drive-in movie screen. Actually, just use your cell phone and then turn it sideways. Yes, you're looking at a flat screen image, but you can't tell the difference, in a certain sense, between that and reality, because it mimics motion with the action of the pixels. That leads you to believe that you're seeing genuine motion. And so you have depth perception, which is why on a well-timed train coming right at you, just suddenly the train is, wow, you'll jump out of your chair. That's guaranteed. And that's actually a certain reflex test. Like when the doctor hits your knee, why does he do that? They get information back, because if your knee does not jerk, they know certain things. Well, you might say that's kind of specific. Well, yes, but a general practitioner will just check that routinely. Well, this is kind of like that. So the moon is quite entrancing, but in a good way. You're improving your mind. So that is actually a coveted goal in every family that's ever existed on the face of the earth. It's not just new to the modern age. You want your son to be a scientist. Absolutely. Well, in the old days, that might have meant, getting out the star charts and plotting the positions of planets in the houses of the sun. Johannes Kepler did. He made his living that way. Read his biography. Johannes Kepler, he lived quite a while ago. What a life. Oh boy, he sure did have quite a life. He dropped in on Tycho Brahe up in wherever that kind of interesting man had his own island where he did basically astronomy. And he was a very well respected astronomer to this day. There's a big crater on this little gal over here. There's a big crater called the Tycho. Actually, I think it might be a Mare. You do see I did want to say that the moon is very interesting. I'm not going to do that, but I want you to notice what you've seen a million times before. Actually, thousands of times before, probably, but enough times to have seen it more than once. That thing not only has craters, which you would need a telescope or a telescopic photograph such as this to see, but you can see them. Oh, there are craters all right, all over it, except at the mare, which are quite uniformly flat, and it's been determined that that is basalt, which is apparently quite common throughout the solar system, at least as far as the moon, because we know what basalt is, we have it on Earth. So it is related to Earth in the sense it's made of basalt, at least. So we do know that about the moon. That's geology. Oh, what do we know about the Earth? Oh, geology. Wow. Well, what do we know about the Earth? Because now we can look at the Earth from outer space. Oh boy. Holy smokes. Well, it took centuries to map the entire surface of the Earth, as you're well aware. And everybody knows the Mercator projection, where Antarctica looks as big as 3 continents. And that's a certain projection of what's essentially a spherical surface down to a flat screen image. Well, the polar projection, which is essentially how we see, is to be preferred, but then everything at the horizon is distorted. So this little tiny island like Greenland consumes about 1/3 of the surface of the Earth at the edge. Well, I mean, it just looks huge. It's not really that wide compared to how tall it is, no. But at the edge, yes, well, that's a polar projection. Well, that's what we see. And that's why towards the surface of the moon, which I think I'm pointing at right now, I pray I am. Actually, I can guarantee now I know I'm pointing at it. Am I? That's the surface of the moon. I'll review this because I'm still learning, obviously. But yes, that I believe is the surface of the moon. And it is very Escherian. And I think you've seen a Max Escher painting where actually it's tiled to the surface hyperbolically. It's an hyperbolic projection. It's quite fascinating because the little fishies get distorted, but actually certain relationships persist all the way to the edge. It blows your freaking mind. Well, the moon does that too. If you look closely enough at it, let's just quickly expand it just as a quick, in-house experiment since we have the technology. Well, let's expand this. Oh my God. Well, let me do something else because I want you to see those mare. Look at those cats. I mean, you've got to admit. Just do a little further. Holy Toledo. Those aren't craters. What are they? Well, yeah, good luck getting an answer to that. What are those? Nobody has any freaking idea what those are. They're seas of basalt that are relatively uncratered. Well, they call them seas, because guess why? I'm sure you can guess. Yeah, the cat's out of the bag here. No, we don't malarkey around here at Intergalactic. We're going in. We'll see it all. Yeah, let's just leave the moon just dangle there like something from 2001: A Space Odyssey, which I watched like 10 times. I played the record hundreds of times. I thought the Blue Danube was one of the most entrancing pieces of music by that guy, a famous conductor, begins with a K, and it was magnificent. I heard it hundreds of times. That was my youth, part of my youth. So I am cultured in some strange way. Well, that's not strange. Everybody likes the Blue Danube. I haven't found any exceptions. Oh, they love this. So I'm not alone. Oh, when you're growing up, you need validation. I liked a movie that the critics liked. They consistently, thereafter, like, what's the greatest movie ever made? Well, you mean after 2001, and then they start talking. Because it's 2001: A Space Odyssey is the greatest movie ever made. But it does have an objectionable beginning to someone of my stripe. It's like, you gotta be kidding me. Not the monkeys again. Don't do this again. No, you have to. Otherwise, they won't let you make the movie. NASA will not cooperate with Stanley Kubrick unless you buy the monkey business. And it's like, well, it's already in our schools, so okay. And it's like, what? These are scientists? This is precision stuff. These are actual spacecraft that they already foresee in the future. These are real things. They're flying around in space. They're going to the moon. They're going out to Jupiter in the Discovery craft. Well, this is the music of Luigi Pirandello, who's just a genius at writing this kind of music for outer space. There's our surface of the moon, and there's a giant pair of mare. You explain it. Well, your scientists cannot. Oh, what else can our scientists not explain that teach our children all the monkey business the children can digest? But then you got to tell them, then there are these religious people, probably like your parents, who just can't understand really what's going on at all. And they sent you to school for a reason. Now you're going to listen to us. There's no God, or you can't be a scientist. Are you a little Jehovah's Witness? Well, you better drop that bullshit in the classroom, little buddy, or whatever you are. Because here we do what Ranger Rick says. And Ranger Rick tells all the good little boys and girls, when they get to the rim of the Grand Canyon, the greatest wonder of God emplaced in the skin of this miserable, doomed planet, Ranger Rick will say, millions of years. Have a nice day, because that's all Ranger Rick will ever know about it. And as long as you know that you're looking at millions of years, then I think you Mormon cats in Utah, right on the Colorado Plateau, that proves the flood, well, not in an American classroom. You're not allowed to bring up that kind of science because it proves the biblical flood, and you know it. Yes, that's exactly right. So that is the state of science and geology according to Wikipedia, and I've read dozens of these articles to make sure. Oh yeah, they know. Was there a biblical flood? Yes. But the government is not allowed to say that. No, there wasn't, because otherwise, Ranger Rick's millions of years would be a criminal lie. But the United States owns the Grand Canyon, so this is legal. And it's up to you to de-brainwash your children. And I know you won't, so I'm not trying to incite you to do so. But we began this little video on the subject of wisdom. And so I'm just telling you, as an example, how you will encounter wisdom so that it defeats you. Because this is a war. And you're either going to follow wisdom, or you will be called to account before you die. And that's the guarantee of my little friend over here, Luna. She will indict you because you didn't look at what was right in front of your eyes. I am here not to praise your berry, but to seize her. That is the punchline of a Flip Wilson joke that he told on the Johnny Carson show. And the only joke told by Flip Wilson on his many appearances on the Johnny Carson show was Johnny's favorite, and it showed. And it was a precious moment. I've seen this at least 3 times, but I'll recount it to you. He says there were some passengers on a train, and a lady had a baby with her, and there was a guy sitting there who noticed the baby. And they're riding the train, and he said the guy just couldn't help it. He kept glancing at the baby because the first time he really couldn't believe his eyes at how ugly this baby was. So he looked one more time, and then he just made up his mind. He said, "Ma'am, I just got to tell you that that is one ugly baby." And the woman got really upset. And she pulled the cord. This is how Flip Wilson tells the joke on the Johnny Carson show. And the train didn't screech to a halt. They don't do that. He'll hit the brakes to show that, oh, we got it. And then the conductor comes. That's what they don't screech the damn train to a halt. So here comes the conductor, who is simply a guy who takes tickets. He's not the guy who runs the train. He didn't just leave the wheel, okay? There's several people that mind a train, as I'm sure you know. So this guy comes back, and he's official, and he's diplomatic, and he handles the situation well. He says, "I'm sorry, is there a problem? Ma'am, what's going on? You pulled the cord?" "Yes, this man insulted me." "Yeah, well, what happened? Just say it." "He said my baby is ugly." And then the guy is like, I am so sorry. I didn't mean to say it. I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do? I feel so bad." And she's still angry. And the conductor says, "Okay, here's the thing. It looks like it's over, and we're very sorry you were offended, ma'am. It looks like he's very sorry that he said that. And so we'd like to just give you two some free meals. Would that be all right? And then we'll just say everything's fine, okay?" And the train can continue. "And ma'am, we'll also bring a banana for your monkey." "I'm sorry, Flip." Well, Johnny wouldn't have laughed at that because, okay. Yes, I'm well known for ruining jokes. That's one of my skills, part of my skill set as a pretend wise man, which obviously I'm trying to trick you. So the moon has unexpected delights. Oh my goodness. Get a telescope, you're in heaven. And it's really that simple. Astronomers say this. I became an astronomer because I couldn't resist the pressure. I'm sure many of you can identify with just being pressured into a new identity. Well, this was strange to me because that meant like mathematics, calculus. No, it's something even worse. It's handling an actual delicate instrument. And this is not something that I was perfectly designed for. I'll just put it that way. So it involves mechanics. You have to aim it. And I spent hours looking for the moon. It's unbelievable. I'm just, it was a klutz, inept. I toppled it. I actually have a scar on my arm. I got this giant telescope. Well, it's 6 inch, so it needs a tripod. It's not something you hold in your hand like out at sea. Oh, I see an island in the distance and seagulls because I have an Italian telescope. No, it is way more powerful than that. Is to look at little Miss Luna over there up close. And planets. You can see planets with a telescope. Oh, yeah. You can see the Galilean moons with a telescope. I watched, and I don't think my telescope was powerful enough to pick this up, but I had a program just inside my doorway running on a computer called Stellarium. So I was in real time mapping the skies, and I could run in and look and see what it was that I was trying to see with my telescope that by then I had learned how to point anyway. And I got to be pretty good at finding stars, although, let's face it, it's a real art. Oh no, I could still spend minutes looking for a certain star, but you just get practiced. I don't know. If someone like me can learn it, you can too. That's the gift of astronomy. You won't regret it. That's for honkin' geese sake sure. You get your but get advice before you get a telescope because It's a hefty. Oh, you're not just, it's not like getting a slinky or a skateboard. No, it's a huge expense. And it just goes up and up and up. And then you're addicted. Then you need to work harder. You need to make more money. And of course, that can lead to crime. Because now you have a habit, you just like need tens of thousands of dollars a year to support your habit. No, I need new photographic equipment. I'm going to need new generators. We need to invest in I don't know, a mobile home because we're just going to be traveling to the desert, to mountaintops, just God's own country. We're just going to be out at night when everything is clean. You can see into heaven. We're just going to look at things that are moving. We're going to see the satellites going around Jupiter. We're going to see red stars, blue stars. Sally over here has some Instagram photographic, like we're going to take time lapse photography and look at this. Just traveling the shadow of Calypso across the surface of Jupiter. You've lived. I got a chance to do this. I was running inside to see where the shadow was because it would show you this is where the shadow is. And then I go out and imagine that I could see it because I could see Calypso and I could project the shadow in my own mind. I don't think I could actually see it through my telescope, even at its great, wonderful 6-inch power. Oh, it gets phallic. Oh, they get in fights. It's all intellectual, so it's like chess, but it's dead serious. My telescope's better than yours, setup. My telescope's better than yours. But if you shine your headlights in any of our eyes, we'll gang rape your car and force you out. That's kind of like as militant as we get. We don't mean it. We're lighthearted, but we are pranksters. But we won't ever touch your equipment without permission. The only exception to that is an abandoned telescope, which does happen in groups of telescopes. Everyone starts to gyrate. We just got this in George's 100-inch telescope. Now there's these telescopes with nobody there. Well, it's okay to go up and look through it if you don't touch it. But you get your eyeball up, and of course you're going to touch it with your nose, or you're going to miss. But don't knock it over. Nobody minds. Nobody's going to look. You're not going to steal. Here's my chance to scoop up all their telescopes, just pile it into my fifth wheel, and just career away and leave them in a dust cloud that they'll never forget. Those stupid astronomers, well, they are aware that that could happen, but it never has. So it's kind of like a blessed thing to do. Just go out at night with the people. These people of all ages, there's professors, there's kids, there's dogs. It's unbelievable. I've been to many. Oh, their parties, all right. They call them star parties. They are not kidding. One thing they don't do, though, and I understand why not, is barbecue, because that puts smoke into the air. But, I mean, before the sun goes down, sure. Barbecue? No, I've never seen it, but I'm sure it's on their minds. They're just really good astronomers. They don't need that kind of shit. They're out to look at the stars, not to play games. They have granola, they don't care. They have coolers, nobody minds. Barbecue? Never seen it yet, never even heard of it, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was well controlled. Now, we had it out before astronomical sunset. Nobody was dismayed. Nobody is trying to film a transit of Mercury, for instance, which you would not want anything in the sky. There's already too much atmosphere because Mercury never gets too high above the sky. Well, all of this is from looking at the moon. Now your child is interested in the planets, which means he's going to get interested, he or she is going to get interested in the planets. Well, that's going to lead in all directions. It's also going to lead to the study of stars because they're up there too. What are those? Maybe you learn the constellations. You get yourself a crystal ball. You learn how to do the horoscopy, the astrology. You got the angle. You're a good fiction writer, and you just work it out. You just have the equations. You do the work. You study the planets. You're actually doing what Kepler and really What Newton did, you're just doing what the greats did. Everyone who's ever been great has done this. You can do it too. It's fully open to you. That's where this leads. So that's a point of orientation. For your point of consciousness is transfer it to the moon. 5 years old, 95 years old. I'm at doing Bing Crosby. And that's 40 minutes. Thank you for tuning in. I hope the moon has given you some ideas about your children. Who I just want to remind you, since I'm a supposed wise man, is if your children do grow up at all, I mean, we're running out of time, they won't have any children, most likely. So there is some time pressure on whether or not you ever wake up fully, but you do have a portal to eternity, just if you look at the moon, perhaps this week. Just look at it and remember what your good professor said. You can treat yourself as that needy, helpless child who is looking to you for guidance. You are now capable of becoming your own guide. And that's the highest a man can reach, is when he becomes his own guide. But let me just remind you, if you are your ultimate guide, then you have not found the proper hierarchy of who controls what. So whatever does or does not control you that's inside you, this is all about you. How do you control yourself? Have you looked for guidance? I certainly have. How did you fare? I'll bet I can guess. Same as I. We're all in this together. Nobody's trying to lord it over nobody else, but you know that can happen. If there's some kind of agenda, some game in town, all of a sudden the cards fan out. You ready to play, baby? Here's what I've lured you into. Here's my little divination. Oh yeah, it's unavoidable. Did I divine anything along the way? You may or may not need to know that. Oh, I was just examining my recording time, 42 minutes. Well, the old professor can rag on. I'm vitally interested in the nature of science, which is communication. I consider myself to be a part of that. I reach very high. I want you to get your solutions. That's the most a man can offer, is for you to find your way so you can solve your problems, whatever they are. Do I care? In the most general and therefore Catholic way, I care most. I do take this quite seriously, and so I do not desist in the slightest degree from mixing forms of truth. There are two primary forms of truth. Don't ever forget that. One is controlled by your emotional side, and I chose this finger selectively between the two fingers. And this is your rational side, and this is the Buddha's message. When he pointed at the flower, he was pointing at the same thing I'm pointing at. You can learn from the moon, you can learn from a flower. That's the Buddha, that's the flower. This is intergalactic. This is the moon. We want to know everything. What's up there? What's up there? Beyond the moon? The planets, the comets, the asteroid belt, the Trojan asteroids, the minor planets and dwarf planets, and this is still under investigation. Ceres, which is a very large percentage of the asteroid belt, is spherical. We have evidence that Mars was destroyed, perhaps within the last 10,000 years. We have evidence that the Earth was ecocidally struck by something, possibly the same barrage that hit Mars, also affected Earth, and produced the ecocidal flood that's listed in Wikipedia. But Wikipedia is constrained to give Ranger Rick's millions of years, of which there are 66. 66 millions of years ago. That has been most likely disproved in my lifetime. It actually was on the order of 10,000 years ago. The same time scale, now that we know that Mars used to be covered by water. That was discovered late in my lifetime. Very recently, in fact. In this millennium. There is water on Mars. There used to be a lot more. And Mars was viciously destroyed. But Earth was hit as well. It looks like it could have been something that was in between Jupiter and Mars, where the asteroid belt is now, which has never been explained. It looks like something exploded there. And if it did, it may have rained down crater creating objects called asteroids that bombarded the entire I almost said atmosphere, the entire heliosphere. That exploding object would have hit all the planets, including the moon, which looks like it was barraged. Although then it's very difficult to explain the mare. And all the inner planets have these same questions about when were they struck by this barrage of asteroids. Well, there's a prime candidate in the asteroid belt where it looks like something exploded. That would explain how Mars was destroyed and why the ecosystem of Earth was destroyed in the biblical flood, which has now been proved to be a scientific fact, exactly as is known to scholars who look into this. All the convergent evidence is decisive. Of course there was a flood, and it wasn't millions of years ago. It was at exactly where this stratigraphic layer shows it was, which shows that about 10,000 years ago, there was a cataclysmic event that actually is unimaginable, I believe, because I've tried to imagine it, and I don't think I can. But the evidence on the face of the Earth is absolutely telling. The Andean mountain range has been snapped in half, and half of it is in Antarctica. And the other half, which is more like a very large fraction of that, is north of the circumpolar current in Drake's Passage, which flows from west to east, in other words, from the direction of Australia on the other side of the Pacific. It's driving towards Australia going the other way, because Australia is in everybody's way in the southern hemisphere. There are two other places that are in the way of a giant super hyper mega tsunami that affected the lithosphere as well as the hydrosphere on the Eltanen impact off the Beringhausen Sea, which blew Patagonia halfway across the Atlantic, and it blew the northern part of that mountain chain, which now is in Antarctica, blew it like a gate being blown open with a battering ram. And there's no question that happened. It's written into the observable surface of the Earth from outer space. You can use Google Earth to home in. Just look at Antarctica, where it is reaching up towards South America, and you will find through the Drake's Passage for hundreds of kilometers a giant tongue of a mega hyper super tsunami that also blew the Earth as well as the water. The hydrosphere of the Earth was vitally affected by this impact, and there were probably two impacts. There was definitely one in the Yucatan Peninsula area of the Caribbean Sea, was struck by a 1 million Tsar-Bomba strength vaporization explosion, but a bigger one also hit in the southern Pacific, creating the Pacific Ocean floor. And around that floor the ring of fire, was from the Eltanin impact. And that was bigger. And that blew apart the undersea, well, actually under land, under crust, hydraulic system of the earth, which the Bible records. And it blew all the water out of the subterranean chambers of the earth, all over the world. And that formed the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which at one time was a hypersonic sheet of water. So that was Noah's flood. And the fact that an ark of any description could have survived that massive strike from outer space, on the opposite side of the world, by the way, it was in the South Pacific, whereas the humans were in what is now Central Asia, because that hasn't moved much. It's called the Iranian Plateau. It's contiguous with the Himalaya mountain range, and these two form an enormous raised mountain surface all the way from the Caspian Sea, actually all the way from the Black Sea, if you include the Caucasus mountain chain, which transmutes to the Iranian Plateau, which goes all the way to the Indus and the Oxus, and ends that mountain chain at the Karakoram, where is K2, going right into the huge Himalaya mountain chain region, and descending in a very high plateau called the Tibetan Plateau into what is now China, actually always was, but who goes there? A lot of traders like to cross that desert, and that goes into the Far East. So that is a huge mountain range that was pushed up because of the Eltanin strike, which drove part of the lithospheric surface, which we today call India, was driven into the base of another plate, and that raised the Himalayan mountain range, which is no more than 10,000 years old. For that reason, there's limestone at the top, and there are fossils at the top in the Chomolungma Formation, which is a local native term word for the mountain called Mount Everest after a British surveyor, but it is also now more formally known as Chomolungma, which I think has a much nicer ring, but it's a matter of personal preference. The Chomolungma Formation has fossiliferous limestone in it. That's at the top of the world, where presently is a garbage heap that will most likely never be cleaned up, because that's quite a trip just to pick up garbage. But I suppose it could be done, since people have paraglided off the top. They've skied off the top. The paraglider didn't go to the top. He went to the gap, which is only a couple of 1,000 feet below it. He didn't go to the top, but he still launched. He and his friend just assembled a glider, and one guy got on the other guy's back, and they jumped and made it, and it worked out fine. That's a long ways from what I read when I was a kid. They struggled without oxygen. They were running out of oxygen, and the winds were up to 70 miles an hour. There was going to be another blizzard. They'd have to hunker down, and then maybe they'll survive, and we'll see if they get to the top. Keep turning the pages. Shit, I turned all the pages. But now they're like skiing down it. I'm like, wow. A 70-year-old man climbed it. I'm like, wow. It's like they've done things going up Everest. They're just like, wow. Not what I read about it as a boy. It's more like, and they never found his body until 2025. They finally found Mallory's body. He did. He might have made it. We like to think he did, but doesn't look like he did. Or he did something stupid on the way down, which many accidents happen that way. And Mallory was preserved by the ice, and the Chinese or somebody descended and found his body. And it looks pretty much as you would expect for that kind of a fall. It was quite severe, but he was wearing his Mallory jumpsuit, and he had his Mallory this and that just lying nearby. So it was Mallory, all right. Well preserved, what was left of him. Because it's frozen, he's not going to decompose, so there's a big white bone Oh, that looks like a human femur that's been worn clean by decades of snow. So good for Mallory. But back to the moon. You see, that was almost like politics, you know? You should not forgive that. I am so sorry. But there's our old friend, the moon. And I hope you gained something from this. We're coming up on an hour, and so I'll close this out with a brief summary of where we've been and where we're going. First of all, where we're going. We're going to go on another tour so we can see more than just the moon. We would like to first graze the planets just so we remind ourselves that's what we're leaving. Then we're going to go to the Large Magellanic Cloud, which is a satellitic galaxy of our own, and we're going to launch from there to the next galaxy. On the way, we will have a trajectory in an arc that will take us through our minor arm of a supercomplex into the heart of our local galactic system, which is called the Virgo cluster. It used to be part of the Virgo supercluster that has been slightly adjusted. Supercluster is a deprecated term because we'll be instantly seeing the web. Because as soon as we get outside of local galactic space, we'll cruise above our own arm, partially into the void, where we'll be able to look up and see the universe. For the first time in human history, we will see the universe the way the universe prefers to be seen, which is from a conveniently located void. So that's our next goal. And Elon Musk will figure it out eventually if he lives so long. Cast your bets, lay your money down. Not I. I already have won. I will not take anyone's money, although I easily could. So we are headed not for the stars, we're headed for the void, so that we can see for the first time the universe without anything in the way. But along the way, we're going to cruise through about 300 galaxies in our local cluster. The most breathtaking sight you will ever see will be that. So as we depart for the edges of cosmic space so that we can see more, we will be grazing over the top of our own galaxy cluster, where you will see about 300 galaxies all together. And then we're going to go into super hyper warp drive, obviously with some kind of alien craft, probably with an alien at the helm, because don't look at me. This is all guaranteed. It's all in good hands. There's no governments involved anywhere. You are free to go back to reality at any time, but we are leaving our local space in order to get to the nearest galaxy cluster system. And that's going to be an arm. And then we're going to see a hub. And then we're going to see spokes in all directions. And then we're going to notice we're inside of a kind of a sponge. And we're still going out. We're going at transluminal speed by many millions of degrees faster than the speed of light now, because that's what it takes to get to where we really want to be, the edge. And in order to do that, we're going to have to transcend every form of logic, thinking, or reality, or imagination, and simply make a statement which is absurd. We're going to go past the edge, and we're going to see what's on the other side of reality. So stay tuned for that. That is now 59 minutes. Thank you for tuning in. I hope my little sermon on wisdom has helped you to use your tools. There she is, the moon. But now you know it's everything up there. You can also do the reciprocal if you dare and look in. And if you look in and you do it in physical space, you're looking for atomicity, which will end up to be a quantum. And these terms have been defined rather carefully, and there's still a lot of research to be done. That's what I do. What is at that limit? Going in. There is a spherical surface that's very similar to the moon or the earth or the sun, all three of which are spheres. The heliosphere is a sphere. That's the bubble inside which the tiny blue dot exists, which at the outer rim of our heliosphere, looking in at the sun, it would look like a very bright yellow star, and the Earth would be literally invisible. You cannot see the Earth anymore from outside the heliosphere, but you can definitely see the sun. If you back up a step, now you're outside the galaxy looking at it. And now the sun is invisible. You can no longer see the sun. What you see instead is a spiral galaxy of stars. Now we back up one more step, and you see the arm on which your galaxy is a tiny pinwheel. That's the Milky Way galaxy, now called Via Lactea. What does Via Lactea mean? Milky Way. Means way of milk. But that is our intergalactic name. This, of course, is our tour of the universe. I thought you did not want to delay. Let's go past the moon. Let's, in fact, have another item in our select list of visual images. What might we have here? Do I still have... I could put this on pause, but I'm going to make you suffer. I'm going to open up a new window and say, what do we want to look at? Would you like to see the Virgo galaxy cluster? Let's just take a look as we're leaving. We're going to leave this behind, but this is actually where you live. Let's get a look. Wikipedia always has a good one. Let's see what Wikipedia has here. We'll open this image in a new tab. What do we have here? I think you can see that. Let's just expand that if we may. Make that a little larger. Oh, there we are. That's our Virgo galaxy cluster. And we are not actually in this view because we're looking out from where we are. I think that makes sense, doesn't it? I hope so. So let's get a quick look at our local, holy Toledo, those are galaxies. Now a lot of those are stars, but you see down in the lower part, those are galaxies. My goodness, how far does that go? Well, let's just see if we can see the whole thing here. Oh my goodness, there are galaxies galore, but I didn't see any more, did you? Maybe they're over here. Let's see if we can find some more galaxies. Whoa! There they are. Oh my goodness. Look at that. So, wow, man. I would have to say, just speaking on my own recognizance, I never tire of looking at this. Now, of course, there's limits to everything. Oh yeah, we're going to go further out. We have this capacity. So that's our tour of the universe so far. Oh, how much farther can we go? Well, the James Webb Telescope gives us our next destination. We would like to go to the edge of what we can see with this super sub-infrared telescope. It really is focused away from the optical range down into the red because all that light from that distance has, of course, lost energy. It's red shifted. Oh, that's for real. That's why it looks red. It's because it's red shifted. Everything is red at the edge because we've seen that far. We can see where it turns red. Well, that is amazing because there's your definition of redshift. Now, we have come up with some much better, not only explanations for what that is, but just descriptions. Because actually, that's a mathematically computable redshift. And I think you've heard of this, ostensibly discovered by the Major Edwin Powell, the Major Hubble. Major Edwin Powell, the Major Hubble. He had just come back from World War I, and the English really liked him. He came back with a kind of a British accent, which was not well received at all. What a pretentious But then he discovered the universe, and that tends to make up for any gaffes along the way. Like me going up to Oregon and accidentally pronouncing the Willamette Valley the way I just pronounced it. Willamette. I was scorned. I was a pariah. Oregonians are like that. And you better not mispronounce the name of their state. I wouldn't dream of it. One day I'm going to go back to Oigani. Did I say that right? Oigani. Yes, that's the correct pronunciation of that lovely city that I pass through without stopping every time I go to Oregon, trying to get somewhere good. Well, there's a lot of stops along the way. You can go up that river, though. I said, though. From Rosedale, just go up. You know what's at the top? Crater Lake. So don't tell me Oregon is just desolate of wonders. No, it has Crater Lake. Did I go there? Almost. I got up there and I looked at it where I could see there was certainly a lake in there somewhere, but I didn't go there. And it really is a lake in a crater, so if you're not actually at the rim, you're not likely to see it. Although I was as close to being able to, I might have seen it and forgotten because it's not that great. I was going up to the hot springs, which I visited, which was fine. It's a very nice hot springs, right on that river, whatever they call it. I think, is it the Rogue? It might be the Rogue River, but whatever river it is in Oregon is like, that's an hour. So thank you again for tuning in for the drivel that inevitably comes at the end of a 1 hour lecture. And it's not a lecture, it's a presentation. You saw the diagram, so I always make this mistake though, because lecture is easier to say than presentation by 2 syllables. So that's the motivation there. Thank you again. Keep looking up. Check out the moon if weather permits, and if not, it will eventually, and then look at the moon. Thank you very much. This is Intergalactic. We'll be right back.